So I cut out some of this. We're not going to go over. So it's not going to be as long as originally. I think the slides originally on this one was like 95 slides or something. I cut it down to 60. So I'm going to fly through these pretty quick. And remote connectivity and networking is kind of like you're doing this week with the lab or next 2 weeks. It's everywhere. Okay, remote connectivity, cloud computing, and virtualization. Those three keywords are buzzwords that are real and are happening now in networking. Okay, you'll learn a little bit about remoting by the lab you're doing, and once students do a remote session, you get kind of hooked on it because you realize some things you can do with it that you hadn't thought of before. Okay, especially if you work with networks or you work with multiple computers or you help people here, there, and yonder. You can set something up this remotely and get it done more efficiently, and you don't have to leave your house, or you can do it wherever you're at. Now, the downside, I think I mentioned to you on all these fancy tools, if people know you can do it or your job knows you can do it, you never get a vacation. Okay, and so that's the downside to it. So there's always an upside, but there's always a downside. So. But network connectivity is definitely something you will want to do and investigate and to play with. So this chapter goes over that. Goes over WAN connectivity. Goes over some of the topologies. The topologies for WAN, which could be wireless, could be remote, are the same basic topologies that we've already went over on wired networks for the most part. Okay. There's some differences on how stuff travels across the network, but it's basically the same protocols and same topologies. So I just want to real quickly, in a nutshell, as far as the great thing about remote connectivity is, we'll say this over here is your work environment where you've got all of your servers, and then this here could be maybe remote users that are on the road all the time. 2 and 3 are your clients, and this is a server. The great thing about remote connectivity is, before the days of remote connectivity, if these clients on the road had issues, you'd have to spend hours on the phone talking to them, and then a lot of times they'd have to take their laptops into a local networking person to fix whatever. But now with remote connectivity, I can be over here, so the network admin can be over here, and you can be, whether it be at work or your house or wherever, at a conference, you can quickly remote in to these devices to not only fix client issues on the road, but you can also do backups, update network information, install new users, install new software. Pretty much everything you can do if you are actually there, you can do remotely through software like we're using this week. Or LogMeIn is another one I recommend for that. So remote connectivity kind of frees up network admins to be more productive. And once you begin using remote connectivity software, it will help you tremendously. And for most students, if you're like me, the logmein.com account is going to be more than enough for what you need personally, because most of you have 5 or under computers you connect to on a day in, day out basis or week in, week out basis. If you go beyond that number of 5, you can buy corporate editions, or they do have pro editions of logmein.com where you can set up accounts of like 30, 40, 50 computers. And I know people that do that actually do a lot of remote controlling, and they're maybe have 50 clients, and they're a contractor, and say they're a network contractor to do certain things on networks. They can remote control into all these devices at any time of the day or night to do the work. And then when they bill the customer, they bill them for time that they've been connected to that computer. And with LogMeIn, it actually keeps logs of that connectivity. And not only that, but I think I mentioned to you on LogMeIn, you can actually record the session as well as a movie file. It'll save it to that server location for proof as well that you've been connected to that device. Because a lot of times companies, they're kind of leery, especially companies that haven't done contracting before, haven't contracted out whatever, or have people work from home. If you use a software like this, logme.com, it actually tickets your connection. It tickets everything you do and tracks it. Okay? And so when I turn managers onto this feature of remote control software, that's when they start realizing, oh, so we can track when people are connected. Yeah, and you can also track what they're doing if you turn on this little checkbox that says, hey, we're going to record everything they do. So yeah, you can do a number of things with it, and it's already built into that software. It's there, and it's actually been out there for a couple of years, that type of technology. So WAN essentials, I've already mentioned the slide before. Whenever you're, whether you're going distant or close, the technology for WAN basically allows for multiple local area networks to connect to each other through a WAN connection, a wide area network. And I like to replace the word wide with web. I like to denote WAN with web, because that's pretty much what it is. Anytime you see the word WAN, it's usually over a net connection, okay, that you're doing this type of stuff. So even though technically it's a wide area network, we're talking about a web connection traversed across a divide of buildings, geographic location, continents, countries, states, connecting one to another. The common properties are definitely there. You have a client-host resource. So say, for instance, you are wherever connecting to a server. The server is still going to be the actual host. You're just a client connecting into it, doing whatever. You're doing everything as if you were sitting right in front of it, connecting to that resource. It does have a layer 3 protocol, meaning it has packet switching, it has data wraps, it has the authentication, just as on a LAN. The differences are layer 1 and 2 access methods, because there's different topologies as far as how things are accessed security-wise. Because when you're on a computer in front of you, it's different to log into a computer in front of you as far as networking goes than it is to log into a server in California through a VPN connection, or through a logme.com account, or through a TeamViewer account. The end result's the same, but the authentication's a little different. You have to go through a few more different tunnels to get there, basically. On LAN, the wiring's totally private, and on the WAN, it's public, and you have to wrap the public tunnel with rules and regulations. For like VPN would be one, encryption technology would be another. Secure socket layers, SSL, you might have seen that when you went to secure web pages. Have the little lock up there and the HTTPS and the URL when you've logged into your bank account or something. So be there for the authentication. So here we have a LAN and WAN connectivity. On the left side is your normal LAN connectivity, multiple star topology, and you've got in here your file server. You've got your hubs connected to a switch, and then your clients, normal star topology. You take that analogy and then push it over to a WAN topology. It's basically taking this information here and making it more widely focused to regions. Okay, so we've got a LAN in all these areas in Charleston, New York, Detroit, and Seattle, but what's connecting them is a WAN tunnel. And that WAN tunnel could be VPN, it could be ISDN, it could be T1, T2, T3, T4, it could be direct, satellite connection, so a number of different things. But WAN sites are connected with that location, with that WAN connection. The topologies on a LAN, differences from a WAN to LAN, is the distance basically. That's it for the most part, a longer distance. So the medium traveled between those distances could be fiber optic, direct T1, T2, T3 line from AT&T. It could be a high-speed cable, like most of you have from your house. A lot of businesses have now too. WAN connection do require routers within that connection to work, both on the local LAN side and wherever that WAN's connecting to the. So it's basically from LAN to LAN, you need routers on both sides to connect that to work. It's not capable of non-routable protocols because it's a public protocol. It's not private. So it all has to sound router topology. Now bus, this is where each site connects to 2 sites maximum, and it's similar to a LAN topology in that the network site depended on every other site to transmit and receive data. The difference in the LAN is that the difference from LAN topology on WAN is that different locations connected to another through point-to-point links. And best use on this one is organizations requiring a small LAN. Drawback, it's not scalable. So if you have 2 offices in the same city, it'd work fine. Okay, but on a bus topology, both offices have to be up and running all the time for that technology to work. Okay, and so normally this isn't the most ideal setup, and it's actually an older topology. Bus topology is. The newer one would be a star topology. We're looking in just a second, and that's probably the one I'd recommend, and that you would probably walk into if you had hired in a place that would already have it set up. But here we have a direct link from whatever to whatever. So point A to point B to point C to point D, direct link. And you'll notice in this example, different linkages, different mediums it's traveling across. Between the first and second building on the left, it's DSL. That's that link. That's that bus link. The middle's T1, and the top right 2 is T1 as well. Again, direct link, and there can be, say for instance, if you're needing from possibly you've got data coming from this location to this location, and say this line breaks somewhere, something happens, you lose that. You lose that totally. And so that's a downside to bus. But we'll look at some other ones here in a second. Ring, this is actually a little bit more redundancy, in fact a lot more redundancy in data. Each site's connected to 2 other sites at all times. So every one site on a ring is connected to 2 other sites at all times. It's always connected to 2 others. Every node, every one node has 2 nodes it shares that data with as it's going across. And so I always like to just draw a real crude example here of 6 nodes, and we'll say those are 6 locations, 6 routers, okay, that are connected. And what's going to happen is, as we'll say this server wants to, this network wants to send some information to this network over here, and what happens is it starts out with 1 connection, 2 connections right there, just for the very first segment of data. So what happens is this node, and this node all has the same data packets traveling at the same time. It duplicates it, or actually triplicates it, makes it in triple form as it's going across the network. And then when it goes from, say it gets rid of this one, and then goes to this one, then gets rid of this one, to this one, and so it's continually connecting to 2 nodes at a time as it's traveling across the network. The differences on this one from LAN is that it connects to locations instead of internal routers or internal switches. It's connecting routers, router to router, basically, on a WAN. Internally, on a LAN, it would be connecting switch to switch, basically. or hub to hub. Expansion on this one is expensive because, again, you have to have 2 routers on a WAN topology for every 1 router. So basically it's going to take 3 initial connections for this to work properly on a ring topology. It's best used for 4 or 5 locations maximum. Beyond that, it doesn't work too well. So maybe, and a good example of this one, banking systems use this a lot. Okay, local banking systems that maybe have Chicago to Rockford and have 4 or 5 branches. Perfect. Because banking systems have to have high redundancy of data because data has to get there. It must get there at such and such a time. For, like, say, I don't know, direct deposit would be an example. It has to hit direct deposit at, say, 1:30 a.m. on Thursday night every 2 weeks. That has to happen. Otherwise, people don't get their money. And so this is a type of setup where it would fit well. And banking systems do have ring topology. So here's an example of that. You'll notice the difference between a ring and bus is that the ring finishes a circle. It has to have a connection between all areas connected one to the other. There is no broken line anywhere. It's continually moving across that data and moving across that ring. Star in WAN mimics the LAN star topology, which is the most popular, most modern. It has a single site central administration point, separate data routes to any 2 sites. So in this one, you basically have a mothership somewhere that is the brains of the system. An example I always give on this would be like Microsoft, Apple, Dell, Gateway, have multiple locations around the world, okay? But they have their mothership locations that authenticate, have stored data for databases, for employees, all in one central area. So you got Seattle for Microsoft, you got Cupertino, California for Apple, and then all these other locations of the large companies. Right? That would be the actual central location. Then they have routable sites that if the central location fails or something happens, they can fail safe over into these routable sites. And they're going to have 2 or more sites that they're connected to. Advantage of this is single connection failure affects only 1 location, because when you've got the star topology and this has all your central resources, this will be your central resource area that's sending everything out, and you're sending out all throughout the nation and the universe, and say this connection fails, it's only going to be affecting that location, not the other locations. Okay, so you're going to have basically an advantage over the bus and over the ring topology. Shorter data paths between any 2 sites as well. Expansion is very simple. You just add a new line. Done. Add a new line between that mothership and the switch on the other end, or router on the other end. Drawback, if this fails, bad trouble. But I think I mentioned this already. What a lot of companies like Microsoft will do, Apple will do, they will have backups for these locations. They will definitely have backup redundancy for those locations. So if that location fails, immediately switches over to another location. You know, all these sites have that, by the way. Because, well, another example, Amazon. Okay? Amazon has got multiple fail-safe locations. 24/7 business, probably the largest online purchasing house in the world, and in fact I think it is, as far as selling different products 24/7. So they have to have uptime all the time, and so a lot of fail-safe locations for that one. By design, it is correct. By design, it only has 1 central location, and if that fails, nothing's going to be connected. So this is an example of the mothership there in the middle, connecting T1 line to the routers on the 3 buildings there on the bottom. And then mesh basically incorporates everything. And basically on the mesh, it's a conglomerate of topologies that have merged over years. Okay? And mesh has one advantage, though. This is kind of like the mixed mode in LAN topology, in that it does have what's called a full mesh WAN, which every WAN site directly connects to every other site. The drawback on this one is the cost. It's kind of like every connection is in and of itself a small little mothership, basically, connected one to the other. And mesh topologies are definitely for companies and corporations that have to have data. So I would guess probably the Amazon scenario would fit more in the mesh topology, because it has a lot of little motherships that if one fails, the other, it goes over to the other one. So data will always be there. Web services will always be there. Credit card information services will always be there. So full mesh would be every site could be at any moment that central administration site. Okay? In essence is what it is. You can have partial mesh, meaning only certain locations can do that. So you can see on the left, that's a full mesh. You've not only got the star, you also have star to star to star to star, basically. Every location is the main, could be the main central location source for that connection. That's how it's set up. So yeah, a lot of redundancy probably, but uptime going to be a lot higher for services and protocols. And then partial mesh, you just pick a few of your locations possibly to be a full service area for that central resource location, central administration area, and then maybe, you know, leave one of them out of the loop. Don't want that one in there. Cost-wise, going to cost more. Tiered, this is sites that connect in a star or ring formation connection. They're interconnected at different locations and different levels. They're flexible, allows for a lot of variations, much cheaper to set up, and requires careful considerations because geography, growth potential, how things are used in those areas as far as data, upload and download speeds would need to be looked at. And then you might have heard of ISDN. ISDN used to be a real popular connection for WAN. Started in the 90s, real popular then. A lot of businesses, if they had a website and had connectivity, they had an ISDN connection. The ISDN connection began to flourish the WAN topologies and WAN technologies. That's where you started having voice over IP, voice signals going over WAN along with data. Protocols were the physical and data link layer of the OSI model. Has the same basically protocols as your NIC card has on a LAN on ISDN for connectivity. It's up all the time. It's connected to the network all the time. It relies upon what's called the PSTN, which is a central location for this protocol to work. And can be dial-up. Initially it was dial-up, and then it went to dedicated connection up at all times. You had single type or two type of channels. One would be a single line first, which is 2 voice calls and 1 data connection simultaneously. And then 2 channel types. You had a barrier channel and a data channel. The barrier channels always dealt with audio, video, and D was data. In fact, you saw on these an ISDN technology ports and the business side that actually have on the port side the letter D for data and B for barrier. And they had different color codes too as well. Connection rates, these are just terms used in ISDN. You had basic rate and primary rate connections. They would use these connection rates for cost, like how much uptime do you expect, how much data do you expect, and then that would be determined on the cost of that company. For ISDN, it wasn't uncommon when it first started out for a small business to have to pay anywhere from $600 to $1,200 a month for a direct ISDN connection. And so it was few and far between that started on the, because it was quite costly to get set up. Here is the topology for it, though, as far as connection. You've got your local company, phone company here, and they had different packages that they would select from, and it would be kind of like you guys have for Comcast, different uptime, downtime, download time, up speeds, things like that. And then this NT1 is basically kind of like the router for this ISDN protocol. And then it would go to the TA, which is basically like the switches that we have internally for LANs. And then it would connect to the terminal stations, phones, so on and so forth throughout the businesses. Phone would be the audio, and then workstation will be the data video type of connection. As far as speed, you'll notice the speed, not real screaming here on connection speed on ISDN, but when it first came out, it was very robust for that time, and was used a lot because in the 90s is where you actually saw a lot of e-commerce sites starting to come on the scene. Businesses like Amazon started then, Zappos, Google, around the early 90s, mid 90s, all these e-commerce sites, internet sites began. Now, it also had a big failure too, not too many years after, but the technology is where it started at. It's kind of like the Wild Wild West at first, and then it kind of pared down to who's going to be the boss, and that's who we have today. This screenshot basically just gives a higher, it went to next packages, went to a higher frequency of channels that you could choose from, and multiple redundancies on rules that could be set up. So as time went on in the early 90s, mid 90s, they figured out ways to use this and split it up and basically make more money off of the ISDN connection. And then T1 lines, T carriers, you might have heard of this. Here at Rock Valley, we have a T3, T4. We have a grant writer that writes all year basically for grant money for, I think it's like $1.5, $2 million a year for grant money to have the connection we have here on campus. And so pretty expensive, direct line. And it falls upon the physical layer of the OSI model. And the single channel is divided into multiple channels. And the medium on this can be telephone wire, fiber optic, and or even wireless links T carriers can run over. For the most part, T carriers today are going to be running over the middle one, which is fiber optic. You have new T lines run, it's going to be fiber lines. But fiber lines are quite expensive, and a lot more expensive than the other two mediums there. So, but it's once they dig the lines in the ground, because that's where they lay them at, it's not over the air. On telephone poles, they actually bury them. And in fact, AT&T has lines everywhere in Rockford. New subdivisions, new business areas, you'll find hidden fiber. That's why you hear the call Julie number all the time, because it was out here on Springbrook and Mulford last semester, I believe it was, or semester before. There in First Assembly's grounds, that somebody was digging, and they had the flags up evidently, and parts of it, Julie had checked parts of it that they called about, but they were digging in a section they didn't call about, cut a multiple string of fiber lines that was owned by AT&T, and so they had to come through, and I think actually a couple actually was owned by Comcast, and so they had to come in, and took about 2 or 3 days to fix. So whoever did that probably was in the unemployment line, I'm guessing, after that. But, you know, always call Julie. It's definitely, it takes time. They sometimes take time to come, but anytime you're digging anywhere in your yard or business, you need to call them. But some people try to cut corners, and it's really not worth it. So here is some focus here. I just want to focus on this one on the right column on throughput, on maximum throughput. You'll notice starting with the T1, maximum throughput is 1.54 megabits per second. We go all the way to T5, 400.352 megabits per second throughput. That's screaming. Okay. Just so you know, though, that T5, I think I mentioned this last week or week before, the new Wi-Fi technology that they're investigating right now is supposed to be pushing the gigabit limit on speed, which I have no clue how they're doing that, but the military is being tested right now. And so, you know, when you talk about speed, you know, I remember when cable first came out, cable modem first came out, people were real excited about it, you know, oh man, this is so fast. And then like a year later, like, this is dirt slow. You totally forgot how slow it was on dial-up, all right? And yeah, you know, whatever we have now, people get used to the speed we have now, and then 6 months from now, if it even takes that long, it's slow. Meaning they want more, they want faster. And so society's going to continually want more, want faster. Businesses are going to want faster, and that's, you know, same with cell phones, right? Start out with, you know, the analog, then we went to digital, and now we're, you know, every cell phone commercial you see is about speed. You know, who gets it faster. You know, all the commercials about, you know, the guys, hey, how to get a YouTube? Oh, how to get YouTube videos? You know, all the funny commercials that are out there. So T lines are definitely fast and probably the most efficient and steady speeds, but you know, what we're looking at in the future as far as technology goes with cable, fiber, wireless, we haven't seen anything yet from where we're at now. It's going to be leaps and bounds 5 years. So here's a breakdown of the types of carriers. On a T1, you've got 24 channels, either voice or data. And I've already given the throughput on this, so I won't mention that. On T3, 672 voice or data channels. And that's the one we had here on campus up through last year. We actually have T4 partially in here as well now. And then T carrier is dependent upon a signal level and its physical layer. It has a one data, one voice channel by default. And what the T1, T3 is just splits that into multiple channels. And what you pay for is per channel connectivity. And so the more channels you have, the higher the T number, and also the higher the cost. Okay, and so it's going to be higher as you go up high channels. T3 provides 28 times more throughput. Very expensive though, as I already mentioned. Multiple T1s may accommodate needs, but not so much. If you really need that, you need to just get the T3. T1 cost can vary by region, and it does. It varies by rates and the location that you're at, whether state, generally state, country that you're located at. And you do have what's called, this isn't as popular, you used to have what's called fractional T1 lease, which is kind of like pretty much like a cable speeds, pretty much you guys have in your house right now. And most have to have more than that. So T carrier lines require connectivity hardware on the site, switching facility. Usually businesses do the leased part because it's cheaper to do it that way. And then as technology grows and changes, the equipment will change too if it's leased. Otherwise, the company has to purchase some new equipment. And so it's generally cheaper contract-wise to lease them. And then T carrier line requires different media than your other throughput type of media. Generally, it's going to require fiber. It can run over plain wire, telephone wire. It can run over what we've done our Cat5 cabling in. But you'll see most T whatever carrier, whether it be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is going to be in fiber optic for the most part when you see it. Even though it's capable of in other areas. Here's what the box looks like in a business, mounted on the wall, and then you have a fiber coming in and plugging in the ports here on the side for connectivity. And outside the building, it's buried in the ground. The lines are buried in the ground. Now it might be like buried in the ground if it's an older building, kind of buried in the ground next to the building till it gets to the pole, then goes up the pole and runs that way. If it's an older location, they'll do it like that. If it's a newer location, the fiber's generally already in the ground. It's already ran already. You do have what's called smart jacks, which is this right here. It's a terminator, basically, that is kind of it's a modem type, kind of a hub for the network connectivity. And it does have a web browsable interface that you can connect to and configure, kind of like a router. Some more than others. Only other thing on this slide I want to mention is the connection point. This is where it costs customers right here, if it's not already set up, is the connection point, the site box to set it up, and if lines need to be buried, there will be some cost to that. Maybe not so much for the line, but the labor to get it done. A lot of times that companies will have to pay for. Here is a DSU, which is a converter basically of the T-frame lines coming in to convert them into LAN connection protocols. So your LAN can connect to it and your routers can speak to it. On this one, I just want to mention this here's your WAN connection, whatever that is, whatever you choose to go with, whether it be generally going to be AT&T, and maybe it's going to be through a fiber direct, or say a direct T3 line. And then these here, these smart jacks, you can think of these a lot like the configurable routers within a local area network. And then the terminals here, the terminal equipment, these are basically pre-terminal equipment, because it basically takes and converts those channels into LAN technology to where your servers can talk to it, and your other switches on site can talk to it as well. That one. Okay, here's a screenshot of local area LAN connected to a router that is a multiplexer for a T1, going out to the carrier internet and connected to your phone switches inside, probably voice over IP, 3Com, or Cisco. DSL. DSL basically operates over the PSTN line, which is basically the protocol for traveling the lines, and the power. Has a power line, and it also has data line both. And it directly competes with ISDN and T1 services. DSL is not as popular as what it used to be. It used to be very popular. The thing with DSL I'll mention, to be real quick, is the closer you are to the DSL motherships, I'm using that term tonight a lot, the faster your data is and the higher the connectivity is, the higher rate of connectivity you have. Okay? The more uptime, the better connection, the closer you are to that drop site, the better. And that's all I'll mention. So I told you to skip through these. Here's what a DSL modem looks like. You might have had one of these through AT&T, possibly. It does establish connection through TCP, and it does allow for incoming voice and data signals both. You generally have to have a filter, a voice filter, if you're going to connect to a phone. Otherwise, it can cause some issues. Same thing with the internet. If you're using it for internet connection, you can also DSL filter is needed there as well. DSL modem is going to work the same as you have for your cable modem today. These splitters are actually from the provider side. So like AT&T will have these splitters set up around your house in certain drop box locations. And they're usually mounted inside of the same boxes where all the phone wires are in your neighborhood, where they kind of route to. The closer you are to those boxes, the closer you are, the better connection you have and the faster connection you have generally. Let's see, you have monthly costs, drawbacks, not available in all areas. Upstream is generally lower than broadband cable, which you guys have. Generally on DSL, you generally had a more static upstream, so a lot of web designers liked it because it was might have been slower, but it was more static and more reliable upstream, like uploading something, than cable was. Cable sometimes would fail a lot of times if you're trying to upload something. It was really screaming downloading cable, but uploading not as reliable. It's still kind of the same way today. I'm better though. Then lastly, cable modem, which most of you have. How many has cable modem for your house for internet? Okay. Based on your TV signal, coaxial cable. Theoretical transmission, 150 megabits downstream, 10 megabits upstream. Real transmission, 10 megabits downstream, 2 megabits upstream. You also have, bless you, a throttled component, and Comcast will throttle your connection. You can pay for better connection speeds, but it'll cost you money. Shared physical connection with other same type of technologies. Best used for web surfing, downloading. There is a Linksys. The other type that's popular, 3Com, Motorola. Motorola is probably the most popular today, I guess, in cable modems. And basically what it does with the data signal is it modulates and demodulates the transmission as it comes in to talk to your LAN. Basically, is what it's going to do. And it operates on the physical and data link layer, and it generally connects to all connectivity networking devices. All I mentioned on this slide is same as DSL. Your house is going to have a connection node either close by or at your house itself that will run from your house to a telephone pole. And you might have seen these guys when they're installing cable have to maybe climb up a pole to get connection or install a connection if it's not already there, or to fix a connection. So these here refer to the cable drops. Cable drops could be literally, as it mentions here, it has these lines here being the cable drops per household. Kind of like DSL, it's a little bit different in that really, instead of being closer to the distribution hub, as in DSL, it's really how close you are to the cable drop and how many people shares that cable drop with you determines your connection speeds. So if you have a lot of new users around your area that need cable, they're going to use your cable drop instead of installing a new one. You will see degradation in your cable connection. A lot of times what happens is you have to restart your cable modem more, or your IPs are changed more frequent. IP address. Then remote connection, basically allowing you, lastly, saving the best for last, to remote in to local clients or servers to access files, access applications, shared resources, as if you're sitting right in front of that device. And appropriate software like the one we're going to be using for the lab, there's tons of others out there, both Cisco, Microsoft, big on remote control software, dial-up networking, Generally not so much, but you might see some businesses still using it possibly. Here on campus, we used to have it for faculty where you could dial up to a certain number if you had a landline with your computer, and then you would connect to the internet through that connection once you got in. But it was pretty dirt slow. I used it once or twice, and that was about it. Now, you do have what's called dial-up networking, which basically is the same as your LAN networking, and I've done this before. In a classroom one time, it's funny, and I'll end with this story. Is a group of 7th graders, right? And has anybody ever taught middle school kids in any capacity, like junior high?
I do.
You do now? Or you, okay. Well, you know what I'm talking about then. Okay, with junior high kids, you've got to have stuff like ready bell to bell. There is no gaps. There's no silence. Okay? And I had a computer class set up in a horseshoe, right? To where they came in, they were not looking at each other, which is great. They're facing a wall. They're looking at a wall, all of them. And we were doing a lesson on, I think it was somewhere they had to search the web to find step-by-steps how to do something. Well, we did have cable modem, but we just switched to it. We were still on, we had some dial-up. I had dial-up on my computer in the classroom, and we were on a local area LAN, and I had dial-up on my computer, and the cable failed. Cable connection failed. And so I fired up the dial-up and shared my dial-up connection with all 30 computers in the classroom. One dial-up connection with all 30 computers. Okay? So it was funny. I said, okay, now type in this URL, hit enter, and you would literally see the screen, the image, right, start at the top, it start coming down as I was walking around explaining stuff, and the kids would be, so you have to remember, they're 7th graders. Their eyes are glued to the screen watching as the line's going down on the screen, going, it's almost there, it's almost there. It's, it took like 10 minutes to load one page. I think we got like 3 pages in 30 minutes, something like that. It was hilarious because, I'd be explaining something very slowly. And I'd look at it and all the kids at the same time were doing the same thing. They were just watching this line come down. As it got down, we'd get down to the bottom and it'd be totally full. The image would be there. And so that's my story of sharing dial-up connection over a network. It can be done, but if you thought dial-up was slow by itself on one computer, imagine sharing it with 30. And we're all hitting, and another thing, we're all hitting the same website at the same time, okay? And so we're all downloading that same image all at the same time. So literally, like, I'm no joke, one page, 10 minutes.
It would have been faster just for you to download it and then send it to
Exactly. I never did that again. But they were good sports about it. That's what I think about middle schoolers. When it happened, they just went with it, man. It was like, yeah, we're doing it. They weren't complaining at all. They're like, yeah. And they're watching. And I'd be like, well, maybe we should do something else. And they're like, no, Mr. Conkle, this is working. You watch the screen that's going down little by little by little by little. I still crack up about that story. So, because these kids are just so patient and everything. Middle schoolers, though, I remember one time we had a sub teach the class, and I told him, I said, you gotta be prepared. Here's my stuff to teach with, but don't let any lag time go. You're not just going to sit there and have nothing to do. And so the next day when I came back to school, I found out he wasn't coming back. And I said, well, what happened? Well, evidently he had a lesson. He didn't use my lesson. He used his own lesson. It was only like 10 minutes. The class was like 35 minutes or something like that, 35, 40 minutes. He was done in 10 minutes and thought it would be okay to give him some free time. You don't give 7th graders free time. They were running out of the door. He couldn't catch them. They were like all over the school. It was crazy. And so that's my little story about middle schoolers, by the way. And I loved them. I still had some of the kids that I taught middle school actually came here to Rock Valley. And but dial-up networking does work with networking still today. but it is very slow. And it's the same, same type of setup you do with cable modem, or if you do with cable access, or DSL, Wi-Fi. It's the same setup to share your internet. It's just the speed is god-awful slow. Okay? All right? So that's my little story of middle schoolers and dial-up networking. All right, so let me end with this. TeamViewer. Make sure, did everybody get your connection with your neighbor? All right, so remember, that's not due till a week from this Sunday. And in fact, I emailed everybody that everything that the review question quizzes, or quiz for this week, is not due this Sunday. It's due on the 18th. Okay, I updated that for you. So have a great spring break. I'll see everybody in 2 weeks, rested and ready to go to the end. And try to enjoy some time with your family. It's supposed to be 70 degrees, believe it or not, a couple days next week. So that'll be good.